Hi guys, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about what is known as Bleeding Kansas and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And this is a really major important part of the precursor to war, that decade of crisis. This is the thing that really starts to make people feel like maybe we are on a one-way train to war. And so in your notes today, you need to list this as Decade of Crisis Part 2. And I want you to take a moment and look at this picture. There's a reason why the picture is actually stained red. And by the end of it, I want you to kind of think as we go through why it would be that. And at the end, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. We'll talk about it tomorrow in class. So during this decade, between 1850 and 1860, there's more westward expansion. Remember, California is now a state. The Utah and New Mexico are going to be decided by popular sovereignty. More people are moving westward, and as they're moving westward, many of them are not making it all the way to California. Many of them are stopping along the way in places like Kansas and Nebraska and those territories. The more people that move into that area, as you can imagine, the more people who want to stay there and who qualify now as a state. And so at the beginning of all of this conflict, we're going to have to make this issue of Kansas and Nebraska. And so a guy by the name of Stephen A. Douglas, who is a senator from Illinois, he decides he wants to organize these territories to build what was known as the Transcontinental Railroad. And if you remember, we talked about the Transcontinental Railroad when we talked about in our economics unit, right? It's that railroad that's going to link the east to the west together. And Douglas wants to do this because he actually has some investment involved, some money involved in this, right? But to do this, he's going to have an issue of slavery, of having slavery above the 3630 parallel. So he's going to have to repeal the Missouri Compromise. That's what he tries to do. He wants to expand the ideas of popular sovereignty, meaning, remember, that he's going to want to let these states actually decide whether they're free or whether they're slave. So he divides the Nebraska territory into two sections, two new states. Nebraska will be free, but Kansas will decide whether or not they want to be free. They'll have popular sovereignty. All right. Now, the majority of people who are living in Kansas at this time are northern farmers who have no interest in having slavery. But it's not really going to work out that way because many southern farmers see this as a big problem. If they don't move in and they don't voice their opinion, the balance between free and slave is going to grow even wider. And so Douglas trying to split this territory up so that he can build his railroad through is going to have some major impacts, major results. One is it's going to be the start of the Republican Party. They don't exist until now. They're mainly going to be a group of northern abolitionists, of free soilers, a party that had started to die away. Then they're going to start to make themselves on the national scene. This also outrages the North because the repeal of the Missouri Compromise meant that now there could be potentially slavery above the 36th parallel. All right? That sectional divide also is going to really tear apart political parties. It's going to make it even more. Now about free versus slave, North versus South, rather than the parties. And as you can see, if you're going to start letting places like Kansas and Nebraska and Utah decide their fate, right, then there can always be this outside interference. And that's exactly what's going to happen. If you look here actually on the cartoon below, there's the people, the man laying there with his head back is being force-fed slavery by guys like Douglas and some of the other members of Kansas and of Congress, I mean. And so you can see this political cartoon is literally saying it's being shoved down our throats, this idea of slavery. We don't want this. We don't need this in these new territories. But guys like Douglas, because of their own self-interest, are force-feeding it down our throats. So we have a problem. Nebraska is going to be a free state, and Kansas is going to be a state that will decide its own fate, as we have already discussed. And the majority of people who live in Kansas at this time are northern farmers who are against the ideas of slavery. But the South is concerned. And so what happens is many pro-slavery settlers move into Kansas. And by 1850, they hold the first election to see whether or not the state will be slave or free. Thousands of pro-slavery settlers, I'll get that out in a moment, move in from Missouri. They establish a pro-slavery government, and the anti-slavery side refuse to recognize their government, and so they just simply start their own. And so you literally have, even though the pro-slavery people have moved in and taken over and developed their own government, they now have an issue of of being two governments within one, because the anti-slavery people don't listen to the pro-slavery people, and back and forth. This is going to come to a head in Lawrence, Kansas. The government sends pro-slavery forces to get who is known, a group known as the Free Soilers. These are people who are against slavery. They send this group in to squash that new government. They burn down a hotel. They sack several houses. The North sees it as a raid and wants revenge. So these pro-slavery settlers have now hacked to death and sacked many of the anti-slavery forces in Kansas, and the North wants revenge. And we're gonna talk about this guy right here for the first time, John Brown. Now we'll talk about John Brown again later because he's not going anywhere. But John Brown in May of 1856 decides, you know what? I'm gonna do something about this. And he stands up in his church and he says, I feel slavery is an abomination. I think it's awful. And so I'm going to do something about it. And he leaves his home. He takes his 4 sons and they make a raid on a pro-slavery settlement in Kansas at a place called Pottawatomie Creek. They end up butchering 5 men with large broadswords. They hack them to death. And he believed that God supported his side. So if you think of it a little bit like Nat Turner, right, where Nat Turner thought he'd seen a vision from heaven of an eclipse, and that was his sign from God to attack and rebel. Brown's seeing the same thing. He sees that he thinks what he's doing is important, is destined by God, and that he is on the right side of history. A mini civil war is literally going to break out into Kansas at this time, and over 200 people are killed, all in retaliation for that Lawrence raid. This is why we get the name of this time known as Bleeding Kansas, because people are literally being hacked to death and cut and busted up and beaten up for their beliefs and their ideas at this time because we can't get along. So the crazy thing is, it's not just Kansas where all of this is happening, actually. In Congress, it's getting pretty murky as well. And this is no better example of it than the Sumner Brooks incident of 1856. Charles Sumner is a senator from Massachusetts, and he's reading a speech in which he says Kansas should be a free state. He lashed out against another senator by the name of Butler of South Carolina. And he mocked Butler because Butler had a speech problem. He had a stroke previously. And so he talked with a slurred speech. Butler is actually not there. He's kind of doing this behind his back, but he's doing it on the Senate floor, so everybody's hearing him. Preston Brooks, who's actually a member of the House of Representatives from South Carolina and who is friends with Butler, hears this and is angered. And he goes up and he gets into Charles Sumner's face, right? He accosts him. They exchange words, and Brooks, my apology. Brooks actually beats Sumner with a cane. He has this long cane that he walks with, and there's a gold tip to it. Beats him so savagely that he actually breaks the cane and breaks the gold tip off the cane. Sumner is beaten up so badly it takes 3 months for him to fully recover. For a while, he's in a coma. Southerners, of course, are going to love this. They're thinking, heck yeah, man, there's somebody here who's actually on our side in Congress who's going to do stuff. And they start sending Brooks canes by the bushel. They're sending him just hundreds of canes to replace his, right? And Sumner and his followers are seeing this as this is society literally breaking down, right? Even Congress now, the place where we're supposed to be able to compromise and get along and at least be gentlemen and talk to one another in a civil way, is completely disintegrating. So we're having many civil wars in Kansas. We're having battles on the floor of Congress of people savagely beating each other, right? And society feels like at this time that it's breaking down. If you look below, actually, this is a cartoonist rendition of the attack, and you can actually see the guys in the back who are kind of cheering on Brooks to beat up Sumner. That's how crazy this time is getting. So that's it. So I go back to my earlier question. Why is this picture red? Well, as you can probably imagine, this is part of that Bleeding Kansas, right? We can assume that the bearded gentleman there is John Brown, who is leading that raid on Pottawatomie Creek and making his voice heard. Now, society, as I said, is starting to really disintegrate in the United States. You're having this fight in Congress. You're having these many civil wars. And it's leading up to even more problems ahead, which we will talk about next time. Please make sure you have all this in your notes. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask them when I see you tomorrow in class. And until then, have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.